I will pass very quickly what I consider the most important issues presently. We are concerned about this part of the electromagnetic spectrum from 0 Hertz up to the lower limit of infrared. The highest part is the microwave part, or RF. RF is a bit wider than the microwave. The lowest part is the ELF, extremely low frequencies, which is very important because all modern microwaves include also extremely low frequencies. And there is considerable amount of information that actually what is responsible for the biological effects are the extremely low frequencies included in every form of microwave radiation. We are living within a natural electromagnetic environment since the beginning of biological evolution. We're living within the terrestrial electric and magnetic field. When these fields do not change considerably from their normal values, there is no problem. But every 11 years, for a few days or weeks, there are so-called magnetic storms, which change the values, the average values of the terrestrial fields. And then we have heart attacks, we have strokes, nervous and psychic disorders, hypertensive crisis, and mortality during this period. So that teaches that when the exposure is stable, it's safer. When the exposure is variable, it becomes not safe, because living organisms, they are wisely made to be able to adapt to external stressors. When these stressors are kept constant, but when the stressors change, and especially when they change unpredictably, then the wise living organisms cannot adapt to these changing stressors. And we have also the natural atmospheric fields. They are made from the global lightning. Every moment there are thunderstorms, about 2,000 thunderstorms on Earth, and there are about 100 lightning discharges per second on Earth. All these discharges, they create a global background, global electromagnetic background, which was measured, was calculated by Schumann in the 50s, that the basic frequency of this background, he had calculated theoretically that it was 10.6 Hertz. Later, it was measured by sensitive instruments that the basic frequency is 7.8 Hertz due to ionospheric illusions. Schumann's calculations were correct, but the difference is due to ionospheric illusions. There are people who can sense an upcoming thunderstorm while there are no meteorological signs of this upcoming thunderstorm, while this thunderstorm is a few thousand of kilometers away. This phenomenon is called meteoropathy, and we explained that meteoropathy is actually a type of electro-hypersensitivity in this paper. Therefore, we have the basic frequency of atmospheric resonances to be 7.8 Hertz. And amazingly, the basic frequency of the alpha rhythms of our brain oscillations are exactly 7.8 Hertz. Is this a coincidence? Of course not. Of course not. What this teaches, what this fact teaches, that the atmospheric ELF, electrical oscillations, are the pacemakers of the human and animal in general brain activity. Our biological clocks, our biological rhythms are attuned by the natural electromagnetic oscillation. There were some incredible experiments in the 60s and 70s at the prestigious Max Planck Institute in Germany by a genius biophysicist called Röntgen Weaver. These experiments lasted for a dozen of years. There were more than 250 experiments, more than 200 experiments with more than 250 volunteers. I think his students were the volunteers. And what they did was they constructed two identical underground apartments. The only difference between the two apartments was that the one of them was shielded electromagnetically by 5 thin foils of metal within the walls. And also, it was equipped with a technical, with an artificial electromagnetic field which could be turned on and off. So, this experiment lasted about a month. And the volunteers in the shielded apartment, they started immediately getting internal desynchronization. This is a medical term. It's well-defined medical syndrome. And that means that their biological rhythms, sleep-waking cycles, activity cycles, temperature, secretions from the body, they stopped having the normal periodicity of 24 hours, but they started getting a longer periodicity within 1 week up to 28 or 29 hours. Then they turned on a generator emitting weak pulses, very weak pulses, with a frequency of 10.6 hertz. At that time, they thought that the basic Schumann frequency is 10.6 hertz, as Schumann had calculated. But still, even though it was a bit different, that frequency, than the real one, 7.8, it worked perfectly and restored immediately the biological rhythms of the subjects. And then, after another week, they turned it off and internal desynchronization started again immediately. Anybody knows, medical doctors know that internal desynchronization is linked to depression, sleep disorders, impulsivity, mania, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, and increased cancer risk. Therefore, the conclusion we can make is that shielding the houses is not the best way to protect. Because maybe, of course, I have to say that the shielding made by Weaver was intense shielding, was 99 reduction of the natural fields. If you had a compass within the apartment, the compass would not work. Of course, you would not receive radio stations. RFs are cut much more easily than ELS. But we don't know what happens after long-term shielding. Because what is sure is that any type of metal shielding reduces all frequencies. It reduces more easily the higher frequencies, but it reduces all frequencies. So we don't know what happens after long-term. And only long-term animal experiments would show if metal shielding is safe or not, in what degree safe. Of course, there's cosmic microwave radiation, and some people say, why worry? We always had exposure from microwaves. from this cosmic microwave radiation. Is there any relation between the cosmic microwaves and the artificial microwaves of the human technology? Absolutely no relation. There is no similarity. I'll tell you why. Because these microwaves actually are not microwaves. It's infrared radiation. There is an effect in physics called Doppler effect. The universe, as we all know, is expanding. And the Doppler effect says that when a source of radiation is moving away from us, its frequency comes to us reduced. So this radiation is infrared, but due to the cosmic expansion, it comes to us reduced as microwave radiation. So there is no relation. This is photonic radiation. I have argued in my latest publication that artificial electromagnetic radiation does not consist of photons, but of classical continuous waves, as those described by the great English physicist Maxwell. Photons are produced by time-finite events, by excitations and de-excitations of bound electrons in atoms and molecules. This is time-finite events, so their duration is time-finite. But electrons, free electrons, not bound electrons, within electric and electronic circuits that produce all kinds of man-made radiations, they do not emit radiation due to excitation and de-excitation, which is time-finite. They produce radiation constantly as long as they are accelerated within the circuit. So these events are not time-finite, are not photons. They are continuous waves like those described by classical electromagnetism. This changes the whole consideration how man-made electromagnetic fields act on living tissue. It's a different way that a time-finite wave will act, and very different how a continuous wave will interact. Maybe even if it is of significantly smaller frequency or intensity. It is like we compare an intense acute effect with a long-term effect. It's exactly the same. What is better? What is safer? What is more dangerous? The mobile phone on our head for 5 minutes, for 1 hour per day, or a base antenna in front of our house 24 hours per day, every day? What is more dangerous? We don't know what is more dangerous. Maybe the lower radiation, the lower intensity radiation for long-term exposure, it's even more dangerous. We don't know this, really. We have physiological endogenous electric and magnetic, of course, since there are changes in temporal changes in the electric field, the magnetic field is produced. So we have endogenous physiological electromagnetic fields in all animals, in all tissues, in all cells. This is supposed to be a cell, and this is the membrane of the cell. All cells, they have a quite intense electric field on the order of 10 to the 7th volts per meter. And the internal is always negative in regard to the external. This is how the membranes are made by lipids here, and these are transmembrane proteins. And there's a type of these transmembrane proteins called electrosensitive channels or voltage-gated channels, which open or close by electric forces exerted on certain charges, fixed charges on some of these helices here, which are the sensors of the channel. These channels are very important, as I will say, and as Martin Paul will explain also. We have endogenous transient electric currents made up from ion fluxes through the cell membranes and through the cytoplasm, controlling practically every cellular and tissue function in all living organisms. These currents are ion flows, directed ion flows through the cell membranes and the cytoplasm. Of course, when the concentrations of the ions within the cell change irregularly, these currents, these sensitive currents controlling every function, are changing also irregularly. We have the ions, billions of ions, calcium, sodium, potassium, magnesium, any type of ions within the cell, within every cell. They control practically all cellular functions. These ions, they are not static, and they don't move randomly. No, they oscillate slowly, all the time. Each ion oscillates in its own frequency. It's called self-frequency. Very slowly. The frequencies are 0.01 up to 0.2 hertz. These oscillating ions are considered to be the cellular clocks, the local clocks, all attuned by the central pacemaker, which is the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's a group of neurons above the optic chiasma, which fires rhythmic nerve impulses every 24 hours that stimulate and regulate the local clocks, local molecular oscillators, which control the biological rhythms of the whole organ. So this central biological clock is attuned by the 24-hour periodicity of light and dark, by the external natural electromagnetic fields, and by the Schumann oscillations. So all living organisms have electromagnetic nature and live since the beginning of evolution within a natural electromagnetic environment. All man-made electromagnetic fields will inevitably interfere with these internal natural fields, which control all functions of life. This is the simplest form of an electromagnetic wave. It's called plane harmonic wave. The electric and the magnetic components are mutually vertical, and they are also vertical to the direction of the wave. One property of the man-made electromagnetic fields is that they are totally polarized. All man-made electromagnetic fields are totally polarized. That means that the electric and magnetic vectors, they oscillate, each one on its own plane. They oscillate on one plane, all the time, on one plane. This plane is determined by the geometry of the circuit or the antenna which produces the wave. The geometry of the circuit does not change, it's there. The polarization does not change, it's the same all the time. When we have an antenna vertical, the waves, the plane of the waves is parallel to this direction. They oscillate always like this. So this is a man-made field, and this is a natural field, which is not polarized, or it's sometimes, in some occasions, partially polarized. And, for example, natural light consisting of photons. One photon oscillates like this, another like this, like this, like this, like this. If we sum all this, it's zero oscillation in average. That's why natural fields are vital for living organisms, while polarized, totally polarized, man-made fields are dangerous, because they force every charge within living tissue to oscillate on one and the same plane. So, okay, I will speak more if I have the time, and Martin Power will also speak about this. This is the famous experiment of Thomas Young, the great English physicist, back in the 1800s. He had a source of light, natural light, and he let it pass through two identical slits. And then he got these successive light and dark regions. Why? In the light regions, we have constructive interference. The two waves from the two identical sources, they come with the same phase, of course, with the same polarization. This is not explained, this phenomenon is not explained still by quantum physics. It's a dark page for quantum physics. Because this phenomenon is explained not considering light as particles. And actually, light is not both light and particles. It's only wave packets. The practical conclusion from this effect is that polarized electromagnetic waves interfere with each other. Man-made fields interfere with each other when they have the same polarization and the same frequency. Then we have standing interference effects. They don't change with time. But when the frequency is different, we can have unpredictable interference, constructive interference, where the intensity doubles or multiples at certain locations, and these locations are unpredictable. So we can have hot spots at unpredictable locations due to constructive interference from antennas. When we drive the car very slowly, at some locations, we catch the radio station, we receive a radio station, and then we lose it. And then we receive it again. And then we lose it. Why? We change from location, between locations of constructive and destructive interference. I already told you the differences between natural and man-made electromagnetic fields. These are tremendous differences. Frequency, in frequency, in polarization, and in the way they are emitted. In the natural emissions, we have bound emission sources. We have bound electrons, bound electric charges on atoms and molecules, while in man-made fields produced by electric and electronic circuits, we have unbound, we have free electrons accelerating within the circuits, within metal wires, and producing continuous, uninterrupted waves. These are some important sources of electromagnetic pollution. I will go fast, I will pass this, and I will stop here. This is the way waves are modulated in order to be able to transmit information. This is the carrier. This is the high frequency, the RF. And this is the information. This is the useful information we want to transmit. This is always extremely low frequency. When we join these two waves, we have this. We have the carrier modulated by the low frequency. This is simply the carrier. The carrier, it is not responsible for the effect. It is the extremely low frequencies, according to the mechanism, to the biophysical mechanism, and according to many data, which show that when the RFs are modulated or pulsed, they have effects. And when they are not, it's simply the carrier, there are no effects. And when you have the same ELFs alone without the RF, you still have effects again. So this is, that was analog modulation, the previous one. This is digital modulation by pulses. You have the carrier, which is already here, modulated by the pulses. You have the carrier only within the range of a pulse. And then the next pulse with the carrier, and so on. This is amplitude modulation, and this is frequency modulation. And here we have, this is how a simulated signal by a mobile phone would be. Not would be, this is how it is, a simulated signal by a mobile phone. We have, for example, in 2G mobile phones, we have a carrier of 900 megahertz or 1800 megahertz. This is, and we have a pulse repetition frequency at 217 hertz, extremely low frequency. So this is the carrier modulated. This is the 900 megahertz here, modulated by the repetition of 217 hertz. This is, as you can see, this is totally predictable. So IR suggests scientists to do their experiments with simulated signals in order to be able to measure the exposure. Otherwise, from real cell phones, the exposure is unpredictable in some degree because it changes unpredictably. And they cannot measure it exactly. It's as if you see a huge tidal wave coming to the shore and say, oh, we cannot measure it exactly, so it doesn't exist. So if these people, they cannot measure it, they ignore it. So in order to be able to measure it, they say that the experiments must be done with simulated signals. This is a simulated signal. How is a real signal from a mobile phone? Like this. What's the relation of this with the previous one? Roughly, we can see the repetition rate, roughly. But each pulse has a different amplitude, depending on so many unpredictable factors, on the number of subscribers each moment, talking on their mobile phones, on air conductivity, on different locations, having different availability of signal. And this changes unpredictably. This is a real signal from a cell phone, from a mobile phone. How is a real signal from a base antenna? It's much, much more complicated and unpredictable, varying. Why? Because there are thousands of subscribers using this specific antenna at any moment. This is a real signal from a mobile phone antenna. This is totally predictable. Cells can adapt because they know what is coming. Cells are wise, but they're not wise to predict this. Nobody can predict this. It's very important to avoid exposure very close to the sources, because all these microwave fields, they decrease very rapidly with distance from the source. I was in a school a few months ago, and I told them, why don't you use a wired Wi-Fi instead of having a wired connection to internet instead of using Wi-Fi? And a smart guy says to me, oh, there are so many Wi-Fis all around the neighborhood. Yes, but you're not close to the source. It's very important. Protect yourself from your own sources, which are close to you. You have tenths of times higher intensity close to the source. This is 20 centimeters from a mobile phone. Some may wonder still, do the biological and health effects from man-made fields exist? Of course, you can make a simple search in the internet by using some keywords like mobile phones, like cancer, like DNA damage, like biological effects in general. We'll get hundreds of peer-reviewed publications. And about 60% of them, independently whether they are made by simulated or real signals, they do find effects. Of course there are biological and health effects. But if we look separately to the studies with microwave exposure made by simulated signals or by real signals, then we realize an incredible reality. Studies, the majority of the studies, which are made using simulated signals, 50% they find effects and 50% they do not find effects, roughly. Studies with real exposures from mobile phones and other devices, 98% they do find effects. Why? Because the exposure is unpredictable. It's varying all the time, and the living organisms, they cannot adapt to it. This is all explained in this publication. Stronger effects. I will not stay on this. One of the strongest effects is the DNA damage, which is a main cause of cancer as well. I will, epidemiological studies, laboratory studies, they all agree that in many cases we have DNA damage, and this is very well linked with the cancer findings. I will tell you very briefly, I will describe you very briefly some experiments we did in Athens with Drosophila, fruit flies. This is the vial with the Drosophila, with their food, and this is the mobile phone antenna. We exposed insects, and we looked at the ovarian cells of the female insects using an assay called tunnel assay, which is a marker for DNA fragmentation. DNA fragmentation is a very serious form of DNA damage. Is broken DNA chains, including both single-strand and double-strand breaks. These are the two ovaries of the females, and each ovary has about 18 to 20 ovarioles. Each ovariole is an egg assembly line with egg chambers budding off the germarium, the first chamber, and developing successively through different stages, developmental stages, until the mature egg is ready to be fertilized and laid. These are eggs of different stages. This is the fully developed egg. This is an ovariole This tunnel assay, in a few words, there is a fluorescent substance which sticks wherever it finds a broken DNA chain. And when we look in the microscope, when we illuminate with ultraviolet radiation, then this substance, this fluorescent substance, emits visible radiation, and we can see characteristic signals of this substance having incorporated in the broken DNA chains. Therefore, we know for sure that there we have broken DNA, we have fragmented DNA. This is the control image of an unexposed, this is an ovariole from an unexposed female insect. This is how it should be. This is the background fluorescence. Here we have the background fluorescence, and in the germarium, only in the germarium, we have DNA fragmentation. This is the characteristic fluorescence I told you before. It's fully, it's completely different than the background fluorescence, as you can see. Not possible to confuse them. The most sensitive developmental stages are the germarium, also called early oogenesis checkpoint, and the stages 7 and 8, which are called mid-oogenesis checkpoint. These are the most sensitive stages. Whenever an egg is not developing correctly, the organism itself directs it to cell death, in order to avoid a problematic offspring. The organisms are wise, as I said. So here we have DNA damage on the first checkpoint. Here we have DNA damage on the second checkpoint only. Here we have DNA damage on both checkpoints, and the other stages are unaffected. And while with other stress factors tested before, like certain chemicals or dehydration or food deprivation, they had found DNA fragmentation with this assay in Drosophila only at either one of the two checkpoints, and only in the two of the three kinds of cells that make its egg chamber. With mobile phone radiation, we found cell death, we found DNA damage in all developmental stages. As you can see here, there is also DNA damage. Here you can see DNA damage in the nurse cells and in the follicle cells with a smaller nuclei. Here you can see these are ovarioles from exposed insect to mobile phone radiation. Here we have all three different types of cells. We have the nurse cells. We have the oocyte. Can you see the oocyte? This is the cell that will be fertilized and will give us the offspring. This is the oocyte with smaller nucleus than the nuclei of the nurse cells, and the follicle cells surrounding the chamber. So we have, for the first time, we saw DNA fragmentation in all three types, because with the other stressors, they had never seen DNA fragmentation in the oocyte. And in all developmental stages, in the intermediate ones as well. And also damage in the cytoskeleton. This is the unexposed, and this is the exposed. Here we have a window effect that Erica said about nonlinear effects due to window. And we can see that we have maximum DNA fragmentation at 0 distance and then at 30 centimeters distance. While for higher intensities here, we have less DNA damage. This is a window. I'll pass this quickly. Here, this is all published studies separately. This is DNA fragmentation with mobile phone at 2 different frequencies, carrier frequencies, GSM 900 and GSM 1800. This is 3 different intensities of 50 Hertz magnetic fields like those of power lines, and this is a pulsed electric field. So we compare DNA damage on the same animal, on the same cells, on the ovarian cells, with 6 different electromagnetic fields. As you can see, with the mobile phones, we found far more higher DNA fragmentation than with the other fields, with exactly the same conditions, and even with smaller exposure durations. I want to only say that there is a biophysical mechanism published 4 times with numbers and with equations. You know, in physics, mechanisms, they have to be presented with numbers and equations. And if the equations can be solved and the numbers are reasonable, then the mechanism is considered plausible. So this is the only plausible mechanism. It's been tested by numerical simulation. This means they put the equations and the molecular data on a computer, and the computer was able to solve the equation, while with other mechanisms presented before, the computer was not able to solve the equation. Here we have an electric field, this frequency. The basic equations is the force exerted on the ions, which they want to pass through a voltage-gated channel. This is a restoration force. Always in physics, when we remove a body from its equilibrium location, we have a restoration force. And here is a damping force. We always have to include a damping force. We always have friction in nature. We can calculate the different factors here. This is the velocity, and this is the damping coefficient. We have patch clamp recording measurement data that have measured the current, the electric current, through an open channel. And knowing that the ions, they pass one by one through the channel, we can calculate the velocity of the ion passing through the channel. And this is calculated to be 0.25 meters per second. So this is the order of velocity that we have for ions within a cell. This is the order of magnitude. And then, having this velocity, we put these 2 forces together, the damping force and the force from the channel, from the membrane of the cell, and we can calculate the damping coefficient. And this is the value of the damping coefficient for a voltage-gated channel. So we end up with an equation where we can calculate all these coefficients, and this omega mi then, omega 0, is the cell frequency. I told you before that the cell frequencies of the ions within the cells are from 0.01 up to 0.2 hertz. So we adopted a reasonable value of 0.1 hertz for omega mi then, omega 0. So we were able to solve the equation. And what the solution gives is, this is the solution. This is the amplitude. This is the amplitude of the oscillation, of the forced oscillation of the ion. We can see that it is proportional to the intensity of the field, proportional to the charge of the ion, inversely proportional to the frequency of the field, omega, and inversely proportional to the damping coefficient, which we calculated. So I call this bioactivity condition for an electromagnetic field. We can see the higher the intensity of the field, the higher the oscillating amplitude. The higher the oscillating amplitude, the higher the force exerted on the sensor of the channel. So we have calculated the numbers that we need in order to gate irregularly a channel. And these are the conclusions. Most significant parameters, the intensity and the frequency. Of course, we are talking about fully polarized, totally polarized fields. If the field is not polarized, we do not have any of these effects, because the forces exerted on the channel sensor, when the field is not polarized, they're not constructive. They are not constructive. In the case of a polarized field, the forces are all parallel, because we have at least 4 ions acting simultaneously on the channel sensor. So exerting 4 parallel forces each moment. If these forces are in agreement, then we have a 4 times stronger force. If these forces are not in agreement because of different polarizations, then the one is cancelling the other. So we have nothing of these effects. Thank you very much.